Hey there, it's Liz Garcia again, and welcome to another episode of your weekly dose of higher consciousness on my YouTube channel at trumpeteroftruthtv.com or my podcast channel at trumpeteroftruthladio.com. This is the place to discover what I call the foundational basics and essential understandings of raising your level of consciousness and building a better life. Now, this week's episode is your weekly dose of higher consciousness quiz. And my intention here is to be the voice of reason and put into context what's going on in the political arena. And I don't want to point and blame or make anyone wrong at all. I'm just going to give you some calibrations that you can use for your own discernment and understanding. So this week's weekly dose of higher consciousness quiz, usually I look at 3 calibrations, but today I'm going to go a little deeper so that you really kind of get what I'm trying to share with you. So let me just look at the list. Which of these is of higher consciousness? And I want you to kind of feel your way and understanding into consciousness best you can. And if this is new to you, then you're going to want to go back to my first 10 episodes so you can come up to speed as to what's going on here. So, which is of highest consciousness? JFK, also known as John F. Kennedy, our former US president, and George Washington. They're the same consciousness. I just want to put them together so you know. The way of being that is known as sane and normal. It's an energy. All of these levels of consciousness are simply impersonal energies in attractor fields. So it's a type of energy that has some particular power to it. So the next one is sane and normal. That's the next one. And then I want you to take a look at politicians. Which of these is of highest consciousness? JFK and George Washington, sane and normal, politicians. I also want to take a look at the energy of one who is ethical, because presumably you'd want the leader of the free world to be ethical. That would be like pillar number 1, ethics. And then finally, I couldn't find the calibration for this, but I know it's super high. And it's the willingness to sacrifice one's life for another. So which of these, this is 5 different things we're looking at, is of highest consciousness? And this particular one, willingness to sacrifice one's life for another, came across my awareness. I'm like, oh, this is kind of interesting. And it pairs nicely with JFK and likely George Washington. JFK, when he was in World War II, it was willing to sacrifice his life for another. He had some heroic, saving of the ship type of thing going on. And I've experienced what it feels like to be willing to sacrifice my life for humanity. This is not to toot my horn. It's to say that there was love present within me where I was willing to die for something so that no one else would have to experience what I've experienced. So I want you to sit with that for a minute, and I'm just gonna be quiet and I'll put it up on the screen so you can look at it. Maybe you grab a piece of paper, and this will be on the screen for those who are watching, but those who are listening, let me say it again. We're looking for, and just because one thing is of higher consciousness or another does not mean it's better in any way, shape, or form, period. There's no judgment, because all of life is equal. And some aspects of life choose to come in at lower levels of consciousness, as an example, because that's who they are, period. And that's who they intend to be for all of life to exist in the contrast that it does. So understand that at spirit level, there's agreements going on, that as an example, someone will come in to be of lower consciousness in order to help another see the contrast and accept their own worthiness. Like that's the general thing that goes on in this world, is we come in to experience something so that we can transcend the lower into the acceptance of our own worthiness, really. And it's not to point and blame others, which, you know, I'm kind of got this whole pointing and blaming and wanting to be right energy going on because of this whole political crap that's been going on now since last fall during the election, 2020. And it's been going on for 4 years since Trump's been president. It's been a big, you know, tug of war between people wanting to be right and prove others wrong and wanting to hate somebody. This hatred, you know, that builds this mess that we have going on right now. Anyway, this is not a judgment, it's just understanding the energies. So again, I'm going to repeat it for those listening. Which is of highest consciousness? JFK and George Washington, they're the same level. Sane and normal. Politicians. Being ethical. And willingness to sacrifice one's life for another, which is of highest consciousness. This shouldn't be too hard, but it's great to put it into context so you can understand something here. So there's a difference between a politician and a statesman. It's a definitely vastly different energy field. So we'll start with politicians. This is the lowest level of consciousness in our quiz today. And politicians, you know, in general, calibrate at 180 on the map of consciousness, which is below 200. And this is significant in that many politicians are not statesmen at all. Statesmen is what JFK, John F. Kennedy, and George Washington were. They were statesmen, and their level of consciousness was 455 on the map of consciousness. That's a huge leap from a politician. So what my intention here is for you to understand, the energy of a politician is 10 to the 180th power, and it holds no truth. It's filled with pride, righteous pride. It's got a lot of anger going on. It lacks integrity and courage, period. There is no courage or integrity at 180. There's none. So if we elect politicians to run and serve us in the government, we're going to get what we're asking for, which is stuff doesn't get done. They flip-flop on issues because they have no courage to took a stake in the ground on anything. They don't know any better because they're in a tractor field that they're caught up in, they're unaware, and hopefully politicians will come into the map of consciousness and understand where they're putting their attention. If they're intending to be politicians, they're going to attract, like a magnet, the energy of a politician, which is all low-level stuff. It's not constructive. It doesn't get anything done. It points and blames others. So you can look out into the world right now with politicians pointing and blaming others outside of them for problems within their own administration. All over the country, okay? There's politicians all over the country that are unconstructive at all, they're destructive. All right, so politicians are 180, statesmen are 455 at 10 to the 455th power. That is huge, okay? That's a huge leap in consciousness and power. They know how to get stuff done. They know how to solve problems. They are willing to sacrifice their own life for another. I can bet you. JFK for sure. At that level, and they don't think that they have to, but they're willing to. And they're not necessarily inviting in, but at a higher level, JFK was willing to sacrifice his life for a higher purpose, hence his assassination. I can bet you $1 million. There's the ego that at a high, well, I happen to know that at a higher level, he agreed to be assassinated for love, period. That's the truth of the higher levels, which I talk about in an upcoming episode when I discuss a book called Your Soul's Gift. Great book. Calibrates at a high level of consciousness. I read it. And I want to talk about that because of the shift I had in awareness when I read that book. But from that book is my understanding that JFK, before coming into life as JFK, agreed to become president, as an example, to be assassinated as a president for love, for what love was the core of what he did. So, which brings me to the one about willingness to sacrifice one's life for another. I couldn't find the calibration, but I do recall it being at 500 or above, which is the land of love. When you understand, like I knew when I was going through the darkest of horrific moments on numerous occasions, I was willing to die for it so that no one else would ever have to experience what I was experiencing. I felt it. I'm like, whoa, it's a gift to have felt it. Not so much of a gift to have gone through what I went through in order to come to that realization, but it is still a gift. And I'm still a little weepy victim-y about it. I'm willing to accept that, but there you go. So let's put this into context. Politicians at 180 lack courage, they lack conviction, and they're self-serving, and they're always covering their asses. I love what my friend at the consciousnesscalibrations.com website is called the cover your ass energy. And they're covering their asses because they made promises and they gave away their power to others because they're not willing to accept their own power and step into courage and have conviction about any topic at all, period. They're always like, this is what the sitting on the fence is, flip-flopping. If you see a government official flip-flopping, you can say, oh, they're not stepping into courage. They have no conviction. They're weak. They're in a weak attractor field. It's not a judgment of them. They're a magnet for this weak attractor field that does not serve the highest good. And they're sure as hell ain't gonna, willing to sacrifice their life for anybody because they're caught up in the ego. I'm doing my best to be neutral about it and accepting that they are a gift. Everyone is a gift to us. And we all agreed to this plan at some level. All right, so the other things on the map are sanity and normal. To be sane and normal, those two are the same energy field. To be sane and normal is 300 on the map of consciousness. That's a huge leap up from politician energy, quantum leap. So using deductive reasoning, politicians are insane. We're letting the crazies run the asylum, so to speak. Kind of like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And that one, Jack Nicholson was the only sane one. When you're around a lot of lunacy, I can tell you that I had the experience where I had to go to mental hospital for 3 days during my quantum spiritual awakening because it looked like there was something mentally going on with me, even though I understood that's how it appeared. I was aware, I had a greater awareness that that was not the case. But when I was in the asylum, Mental Institute, I could see that the energy of the wacky, chaotic, kind of crazy vibration going on there affected all the nurses and the therapists. I could see it. I'm like, geez, these guys they're wackadoodle because they didn't have the kind of the power within them of the ones that I met to even stand in their own power either. They were kind of sucked into the low vibe of what, mental illness can be. So in any event, it's a good idea not to elect true politicians. They're not sane. They're not normal. And the last thing on the list is the energy of being ethical. That's 305 on the map of consciousness, which is 5 points up, or 10 to the 305th power above being sane and normal. Even more powerful to be ethical. It's huge. So that's this week's dose of highly consciousness quiz. And the purpose of it is to put into context what we may have just elected into the highest office of the world, right? And my recommendation for all of us that care about our country and our world and lovingness and peace is to stop watching the news, first of all. The news in general calibrates below 200 and lacks integrity and holds no truth, most of it. And I mentioned in my last one, the only one that holds, well, there's a few that hold strong, and I recommend you look at truth versus falsehood, though this is dated. This is like 15 years old. And the consciousness level of the news can change depending on who's in charge and how they're influenced by advertisers. You know, if news stations can't hold the line on their own level of consciousness and what they are going to be, they can sink into a sinkhole of opinions and not telling the truth at all because they're spinning it to appease somebody else or serve something else. So the news at the moment is corrupting our world, unfortunately, and bringing down our level of consciousness as a whole, which if you subscribe to consciousness calibrations, you can keep up on current calibrations of what's going on. So what I'm speaking right now is as of March 2021. So most of the news is garbage and doesn't speak the truth. Bill O'Reilly, which a lot of people like, you know, they think he's evil, which is, here's a sign that you're running up, you know, lower levels of consciousness, is that you can't discern the truth from somebody like Bill O'Reilly. Smart guy. He tells you when it's his opinion, and he holds to old school journalistic standards of neutrality and facts. So he calibrates at 450 in truth versus falsehood, and he was recently calibrated again in the consciousnesscalibrations.com group. He's holding at a very high level. So there's one person you can trust, as well as Tucker Carlson. And you may not like their approaches, but when I understood consciousness and I intend to align with the truth, I look for the calibrations of the highest people. Whether I understand them or not, at least I'm aligning with truth, period. Though I've decided not to watch any of them because the ones telling the truth get me all riled up about, like, we're letting lunatics run our country. That gets me riled up, which is not to say that people running our country can't up their game. They can, in a big way. They can up their game, but we'll have to see. You got to see what they watch their behavior, watch what they say. If they can't answer a question, right there is the problem. If anyone keeps avoiding answering a question, that's corrupt. There's no truth in that. Anyway, I gotta get off my high horse. My intention is to stop juicing my own ego with the need to prove others wrong and accept that we're all operating from our own level of consciousness and being who we are. This is who we agreed to be, and this is who we came in here to be. No judgment. And understand the history of each individual one of us is vast, multidimensional, purposeful. There you go. That's today's weekly dose of higher consciousness quiz. If you enjoy what I'm doing here, subscribe to my podcast at trumpetoftruthradio.com or the video channel at trumpetoftruth.tv.com. And I now have a new app from the Mind Body Spirit Network that may be of interest to you. I have it on, haven't yet got the Apple version done yet, but the Android version can be found on Google Play. If you go to just search on Google Play for the Mind, Body, Spirit Network, you'll see our app there for a lot of other goodies that we do with the Mind, Body, Spirit Network. And my intention before I end every episode is to remind you that love is the truth at 500 on the map of consciousness, which is a quantum leap above the mind. The mind is in the 400s, 10 to the 400th power, versus love in the spiritual domain at 10 to the 500th power. You're far better off leading and listening with the heart and ignoring the mind to an extent. But the mind is not always incorrect unless you're running lower levels of consciousness that feed thoughts that aren't true. That's a whole other topic. You'll find how to let go of lower levels of consciousness in episode 10. And if this is all totally new to you, I highly recommend you watch my foundational basics, episodes 1 through 10, so you can come up to speed as to what this podcast and videocast is all about. Liz Garcia, your trumpet of truth, signing out. See you next time.